Professor, being that today is December 4th, and in the Yoruba diaspora, this day is synchronized with St. Barbara and is declared as Shango's Day. I wanted to make, this particular question about Shango as far as who Shango really is and what he means to us in our lives.
I think this subject of conversation is very important, mainly in a day like this one, when it is supposed that we are celebrating the day, the Shango's Day. Although this is not something that is typical of the tradition, but it's typical of the diaspora, as you said. And maybe because we have, that we have a kind of synchronization with the other religions like Catholic religion. We know that the same Shango that we identify as Shango in the Yoruba traditional religion or Yoruba traditional culture is the same that we call Saint Barbara in the Catholic religion. But when we are representing Shango in our mind, we are talking a man dressed in red with an axe in his hand and some fire coming out his mouth. For a common sense, are we really believing that Shango is that representation? Suppose that Shango is that man that we are representing in our mind, a black man dressed in red with an axe in his hand and firing in his mouth. How come we are in touch with him? How come we are making a connection with him? In what way that man is influencing our lives? So the common sense says that we have to represent not a man, but we have to represent something that deals with that representation that we have in our mind. So something dealing with an energy, an entity, something deals with a deity. That's the most important thing, because that is a language to describe an energy, a metaphorical form to describe an energy that is present in our environment, in our life, in our universe. When we are talking about Shango and we want to identify as Shango, we are identifying Shango with one of the features. What? Lightning, thunder. We're identifying Shango with the rain. And what does it mean? Why do we say that Shango is the king of religion? Why do we say that Shango is the king of earth? What are those features that makes him or make him the king in our life? And what is the relationship that exists between our lives and that kind of energy represented by Shango? First of all, the color that represents Shango, red. The paraphernalia that represents Shango, thunder, lightning, rain. What happened with the lining? What is a lining? And what is the relationship between the lining and we, the human? Very important and very easy to explain. Lining is a discharge, electrostatic discharge, that happens between two clouds which are electrically charged. What happens when a lining is performing its action? Is happening. In that moment, the lining is making what we call amino acids. And what an amino acid is? An amino acid is the block that form the proteins, and the proteins are the block of life. Every discharge of the lining is a way to make nitrogen. It's a way to discharge nitrogen and to form amino acids. Amino acids, as its name says, means a group, amino group, one amine group, right? And at the same time, we are talking about something that deals with hydrogen, that is the one that makes it an acid, because it contains hydrogen. This amine group is two different elements, chemical elements. We're talking about nitrogen and hydrogen, and both are representation of Shango. Hydrogen is, the color of hydrogen is red. And what happened with the amino acids? What happened with the protein? That when there is a discharge of the linings and it forming amino acids or nitrogen, the rain is coming down with those elements, bringing those elements to Earth. And those elements are absorbed by the Earth. And at the same time, they are absorbed by the plants. And when the animals and when the human being are eating those plants, we are using what? Those amino acids in order to synthesize what? Proteins. And those proteins are the blocks of everything that deals with movement, life. Why? Because we have in our cells, in the membrane of our cells, we have something that we call the IM, the internal membrane proteins. They are in charge of catching, getting the signals of the environment in order to produce life, in order to produce the movement of organs, the movement of what we call systems. In general, the movement of the body, even the body of an animal or a human being. So, if the amino acids, which are the most important structural compound for the life, belongs to Shango, belongs to the action of that energy that we call lining. So we're talking about Shango as the king of life. But something more about that. There is a kind of field, electromagnetic field, that surrounds the Earth. This electromagnetic field that surrounds the Earth is called the Schumann field. This Schumann field is in charge of everything that deals with the electromagnetic field and resonance of the Earth. every single thought, action, or whatever we talk, they are recorded in that field. So that field is the library where every action on earth is recorded. And it is very important in order to produce memory. It's very important in order to produce life. And this human field is fed constantly, every day, by billions of linings. We don't know, most of us, we don't know that. But in order to keep that electromagnetic field working, we have that. We have the action of the linings. And who is in charge of the action of the linings? Shango. That's why we call him the king of earth. The life is kept on earth because of the action of Shango. So we are talking about something that deals with the real life of the human being. We are not talking about images. We are talking about real action of the life. The representation of Shango. Shango represents all the proteins that we have in our body. Shango represents the electromagnetic field of the human being in the body of the human being. All the enzymes and the action of the enzymes deals with what? With Shango. Because enzymes are proteins. And they are, let's say, the workers that make possible the life, make possible the different metabolic reactions and chemical reactions that we have in the body. So, if the blocks of those proteins are the amino acids, and the amino acids are formed by the action of the linings, and the action of the linings is a characteristic, a feature of Shango, we are talking about Shango as the king of life. An energy very important in order to keep life on earth. Shango is also represented in the first chakra of our bodies. When we are talking about chakra, we are talking about the wheel of energy. We are talking about a region of energy, a big, concentrated region of energy of the body. That first chakra of that first region of will is located in the region of the reproductive organs, in charge of reproduction, dealing with the colorectal part of the colon, and that chakra, the color of that chakra is red. That's why we call the part of the life that deals with reproduction the chakra number 1 that belongs to Shango. That's why we say that Shango is also dealing with the reproduction of life, the king of life. That is the relationship between Shango and the action of Shango in our life. We are talking about, for example, when we are an excess of that kind of frequency of energy, that deals with the color red, Shango. In that region, we are talking about different imbalances or different kind of sickness. We are talking about, for example, the hemorrhoid. The hemorrhoid is one of excess or inflammation provoked because of excess of that kind of frequency of energy that we have in that region. We are talking about the diverticulosis. We are talking about, for example, congestions. The fermentation of the fecal actions or the fecal waste of the different which are produced because of absorption and digestion of the food. So we are talking about the difficult to excrete those fecals or those wasting parts. So we are talking about the different effects of not being in relation or, let's say, matching with that kind of frequency of range. Another thing, we are talking about the physiological part that represents Shango in that part of our body. But we are talking about also in the psychological part of the life of the person. We are not able to excrete, to get rid of those toxic thoughts or things that we have recorded in our life, experiences which are toxic and which they have turned into what we call a habit that we cannot get rid of. And they are going to form a kind of damage for our life. That's why we recommend the person who we call Shango's son or Shango's children in general. We recommend them to go through their process of initiation in order to balance that energy. That is what we call to crown the same. This is, in synthesis, what we call the relationship that the human being and Shango as the energy and Shango as the Orisha, and the representation of Shango in our lives. In Osameye, we have a story dealing with Obatala and Shango, and it's another way to identify who Shango is and Obatala at the same time in our life. But as we are talking about Shango, it is very important to identify first, and mainly Shango and the action of Shango in our life in this story. This story tells about the time when Obatala decided to make a trip in order to find his son Shango, who was ruling or who was the king in another land. But before going on that trip, he made an oath, and he was advised that he was going to face 3 different difficulties. The last difficulty that he had to face was dealing with a white horse that he found on the way on the trip, And that horse had been lost 8 years before. And Shango, that horse was Shango's horse, the white horse of Shango. And what happened? That Shango had decreed that the person who were found with that horse had to be executed. And when the soldiers of Shango found Babalawo with the white horse of Shango, they brought Babalawo in front of Shango. And when they brought Babalawo in front of Shango, and he was accused of the robbery, or in this case, to rob the Shango's horse, white horse. What happened? That in that moment, Shango recognized that the person that was in front of him was his mother, Babalawo. And in that mother, in a way of paying homage, he lay down in front of Babalawo to receive the blessing of Babalawo. And at the same time, he ordered to put a throne by his side, or by a throne by his, in order to put Babalawo to rule with him. Until that time, the necklace of Shango was entirely red. From that time on, it was white and red. What does it mean? What does this story mean in our life? Well, the fact is that Babalawo represents the light. We all know that. The whole spectrum of light that is white. The light coming from the sun. The light coming from the sun takes 8 minutes to get to Earth. That amount of light, or that amount of time that it takes, 8 represents the number of Babalawo. But it's not only 8 minutes, but 8 minutes 0.6 seconds, the number of Shango. So it represents the action of the light coming from the sun to Earth constantly, every 8.6 seconds, 8 minutes, 6 seconds. But the action of Shango to lie down in front of Babalawo to pay homage is the action of the light, which is what we call a wave that is bringing information to Earth to become a particle. Because everybody knows that an atom has that kind of feature that can be a wave and a particle at the same time. So the conversion of the wave into a particle in this dimension, time and space. So this action is the one that is going to support, to sustain the life on Earth. Because without light, we cannot have life. That's why the action of turning that wave into a particle, and that particle bringing information where all the structure of the universe is based on, in going to produce life, that is the action of Shango. That is another way to represent Shango in relationship with the human life. So it's very easy. There are a lot of evidences dealing with the representation of Shango as an energy that we have as the most important energy, perhaps, in order to sustain life on Earth. Every single movement that deals with the human life deals with Shango, because it deals with the proteins that are catching the signals from the environment in order to produce the life. And mainly receiving those signals from the light, which is the one that brings the information of the universe in order to produce the life on Earth. This is the real relationship between the human being and Shango. What happened? That we call him also the king of religion, because the meaning of religion, according to, for example, Cicero, and according to Campbell in the modern times, comes from the word religare. And religare means to read again, according to Cicero. But according to Campbell, for example, is to reattach. Every time that we are receiving the information, those signals from the environment, we are reading again. We are reattaching our life to those signals. And that kind of, let's say, process is constantly produced in order to produce life. So it's constantly produced on Earth. It is very important. That's why from that meaning, from the fact that religion is to read again or to reattach again, in this case, Shango is called the king of religionals, because we are rereading constantly through the amino acid, through the proteins that represents Shango. We are constantly reading the signals that produces life. That is the meaning of Shango in our life.